Nights get together and eat afterwards, and where the Anglicans just go out the door and keep on going. And so we're something in between. But there's something about passing the peace when you celebrate communion that just fits beautifully together with what we're doing. And it's a great time to remember our relationship with each other as we get ready to celebrate communion together. So back to Daniel. So this is one of those chapters that is hard to teach for a couple of reasons. One of them is because I keep going down the rabbit hole of the history that is the Babylonian kingdom. It's fascinating, and I was spending all week reading about how they were doing amazing things with the Euphrates River and how the Darius the Great's going to invent the postal system in the next succession of kings. And there's so much history, and it's so beautiful to read, and then I keep realizing over and over again, this is a sermon. This is not a history lesson, because I know some of you would be bored to tears if I went into all that history. But I think the thing that's important about this passage is we have to also understand how the first people who read this, the first time anybody picked up one of Daniel's writings, what did he see? What did they see? How did they sit around and talk about it afterwards? What was it that they were supposed to take away from what seems like an obscure story that has nothing to do with the history of Israel or the people of Israel? And what is it supposed to be for us? What are we supposed to learn from it? So I think the thing that we want to do first and foremost is see how God is being faithful in this story. See, this is a story ultimately of judgment, God's judgment on a king, but it is also an amazing demonstration of grace. And if you miss the two, you only have half the story, if you only have one or not the other. I was reading this week, how long does it take the average person from the time they're arrested till they end up in trial in Alberta? And it's anywhere from 2 months to 2 years. That's a long time to wait for your trial. In Dubai, when I was there in the early 1990s, if you were arrested for a crime, your trial had to happen before Friday of that week. So if I was involved in an accident and the judge had to figure out who was responsible and what the penalty would be, and it was Tuesday, I had to have 3 days to get my story ready, my lawyer up to speed, and be ready to defend my position in court, because no court can exceed that Friday. And I thought to myself, is that a good thing to have swift justice or not? Well, if it's a serious charge and your hand is about to get chopped off for shoplifting, that time would go by very quickly, and you'd like more time to have a good defense. But here we see, it seems as if Belshazzar doesn't really get a lot of time. From the time Nebuchadnezzar has died to the time this story takes place, there's been 2 other kings already. Belshazzar is the third one. They had very short reigns, not very long in power. Daniel by now is kind of the old guy put out to pasture. Nobody remembers who he is anymore. The king has never heard of this guy. Nobody seems to be paying him any attention. And yet God is working behind the scenes. And we see here that King Belshazzar is kind of totally out of touch with reality. His father, Nabonidus, is the real king. Belshazzar is just his son and kind of king in training. And so he's responsible for Babylon. And his father runs the entire empire from an oasis somewhere in Saudi Arabia. And he's been off battling with the Medes and the Persians. They're always having little fights to see who gets to be control. And he has been defeated in battle, so the army has come and surrounded Babylon. But they think they're okay. It's pretty much an impenetrable fortress. They're going to be okay. So he's going to have a big banquet. They figured they had enough food stashed away in Babylon if there was a siege that they could hold out for 20 years. They had the Euphrates River flow right through the middle of the city, so they never had to worry about water. They thought they could stand up to anything. So he throws a party. And it's also a way of praising his gods and asking his gods to come and help. And there's a lot of wine and there's a lot of good times flowing. And as they drank the wine, it says they praised the gods of gold and of silver and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. In other words, every god, it sounds like, except the God of Daniel. And this is where the party changes. Just when things are rolling, suddenly a human hand appears to be writing on the walls. And it's a reminder that there is never a time when God is not in charge. There is never a time when God is not in control, but there is also a time when God says enough. And this was enough. We're told suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster on the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. And he has no idea what it's even saying. It's the style. It's what's happening. And so the first question we ask is, why does God not just write what he's going to tell King Belshazzar in Akkadian or in Aramaic, some language that he could understand? Why does he write it in such a cryptic form? Because we need to get Daniel back into the story. He is the only one who can explain to the assembled what's really going on. And so he's not there yet because the king doesn't know him. So what does King Belshazzar do? He grabs the usual guys, the astrologers, the enchanters, the magicians, the sorcerers. And for the third time, already in Daniel, they can't get the dream right. And these poor guys, they must have been feeling pretty bad by this time. But still, it's an example of God's grace. The fingers wrote the message, but no one could interpret. Why doesn't God just slay him? And I think the only reason is it's grace upon grace. He has one more opportunity for God to speak through Daniel and give him a chance to repent. But there's one more character that has to step in, and that's the Queen Mother. She is probably, we're not told, but she's probably the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, because Belshazzar is the grandson through his mother of Nebuchadnezzar. It's not the usual way that the kingdom was handed down, but that's how the story kind of pieces together. And she says, I know what you need. Call Daniel. And we notice that she calls him by his Hebrew name. She doesn't call him Belteshazzar. She says, call Daniel. She calls him by his Hebrew name. Why? Because she knows through the stories that Nebuchadnezzar has told her, and probably even had her own conversations with Daniel, she knows where the true power resides. And she says, call for Daniel, and he'll tell you what the writing means. He did it before. He did it for your grandfather, and he can do it for you. And how does Belshazzar answer him? Remember last week when Nebuchadnezzar was out in the field, and he says to Daniel, I have met the holy God. The spirit of the holy gods is in you, Daniel. Now, Belshazzar doesn't talk that way. He says the spirit of the gods is in you. Belshazzar, eager to get the meaning of the words, desperate to get the meaning of the words, offers Daniel, a guy he's just met, who just came into the room. He says, I'll give you third place in the kingdom. Dad has the first place, I have the second, you can have the third. If you can tell me what this dream means. And so he listens. And Daniel tells him, before he interprets the dream, he tells him the history of what he had happened to his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. He was out in the field. The Lord humbled him. And he says, now the same is about to happen to you. But you, his son, O Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself. Though you knew all this, instead you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven, we're told in verse 22. You did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. You didn't acknowledge him. You forget that we serve the living God. You serve gods of wood and stone. Instead, we can fall into the same trap, just like Belshazzar. We can also be prone to worshiping the things of material value only and forget what we should be focusing our worship on. But here's where the grace comes in. God warns him one more time, and he says, these are the words and what they mean. Meaning, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Your short reign is about to end soon. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and have been found wanting. Your kingdom is divided. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, the revelation is given. And now what do? We're in the middle of the party. We've had all the wine we can handle. What are we going to do with this message? And Belshazzar doesn't seem to know what to say. And yet he amazingly just takes Daniel's word for it. He says, yeah, Daniel, you must be right. Makes sense to me. Give the guy his robe. Put on the purple robe. Give him the chain. Make him the third highest. Nobody's going to challenge his word. And he's proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But the honor will soon be gone. While Belshazzar and his group are having a party, the Persians have come up with a great scheme. They have dug a trench and diverted the Euphrates River into a dry lake bed. If you go online and you look at the Euphrates River, it would take more than a few guys with a couple of shovels to get this done. This is a big job. This is a big river. And meanwhile, the Euphrates River all of a sudden dries up right around Babylon, and they have gates that go down the full depth of the Euphrates River, and now there's dry land underneath it, and they just go underneath those gates, storm the city. But instead of killing everybody, looting and burning the place, they simply take out the leaders and his fewest closest henchmen, put their own king in place, and carry on. Business as usual. Change of regime. And so we see here how God has mercifully given Belshazzar one last chance, albeit very brief. And we think to ourselves, so why do we need to know this? I mean, this is interesting. History will tell us exactly the same thing. We have records. We even know that it happened in the month of October in 539 BC. So we're only, 2,486 years away from celebrating the anniversary of the fall of Babylon. Why do we need to know this? Well, I think what we need to know is that this is when it's enough. When God sees Belshazzar taking those cups, the last symbol of the temple, the last symbol of God's rule in Jerusalem, and mocking them, this is when enough is enough. But it takes Daniel to present to him the reason why it's happening and what is going to happen. And the king must have been amazed and said, well, why didn't I ever hear about this guy before? Why didn't I ever know about him? How could he just be there? And this tremendous power was there to interpret dreams and everything else, and yet it's not there. And I was just speaking to someone this week, and I was asking, which is the greater miracle here? Is it the handwriting on the wall, or is it God giving somebody the ability to prophetically interpret what those words mean? And then we have another third miracle. We have the fact that all of this is preserved for us to read. Ursula and I found a website. It's amazing the technology that we have today, where you can, in the same, so I should back up for a second. So this is written in what's called a cuneiform style. So it's not letters in an alphabet. It's actually like Chinese characters. And they're put on discs and drums about so long and about so big around that tell the whole life story of someone in these characters. There's between 600 and 1,000 of these characters. And if you go online like we did this morning, we could put our name in Akkadian, and it will come up in the same language that Belshazzar would have seen. That's the amazing part of the technology that we live in today. So if you get bored this week and you want to have a Daniel experience, just eat some vegetables, drink lots of water, and put your information in and watch the Akkadian language, because he had to learn it too, just like you would have to as it came up. But isn't that amazing that we have that technology and it all perfectly corroborates what we read here in Scripture? That's the most amazing part. 2,500 years ago, and all of this information is perfectly preserved for us to enjoy. And you say, well, that's nice. If you're a history buff, I couldn't care less about the Akkadian language or spelling my name in it. But there is a link, and that is to see how God has prophetically moved through these kingdoms. Still no mention of the children of Israel. Today we can look and we can find a place on the map that's called Israel. We can find news about Israel everywhere we turn, on every channel. But in that day there was no place left called Israel. It was just desert. It was all part of the kingdom. There was no people that would be recognizable. But God has his preservation. He has his hand on all of these things. And we see how all this plays out later when we begin to see how the real kingdom that Daniel had foretold begins to emerge, which is our segue to starting to work toward communion. Because what does communion do? It's like this exercise here. We go back and we think about how God has been working in his long plan, preserving the children of Israel, preserving those plates and those cups, the little candlesticks, all the stuff that came out of the temple will all go back there. If you don't believe me, read the first chapter of Ezra. They're counting every plate, every bowl, every candlestick. It's all coming back to the temple. 388 of these kinds of plates. They're all recorded. It's all there. God's plan is perfectly at work preserving not only his people, but his worship. And so when we read this, we start thinking to ourselves, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, we think that the life of Christ, from the time he lived until now, is about the same as the empire of the Medes and the Persians. 1,500 years would be pretty close. Maybe 2,000, depending if you really stretch it out. So in the grand scheme of things, our time here on earth, and even our time as Christians, is very brief. And yet the wisdom that supersedes that flows from one right to the end. And that's why it says in 1 Corinthians 20, where is the wise man? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Can you imagine how foolish it must have looked to Belshazzar when grandma says, bring out this guy who talked to my grandpa with these cups of their defeated God, their few little trinkets that they have left in our vast array of collection of things that we've taken from other temples. These few cups are the only thing that represent who the true God of Israel is, until Daniel opens his mouth and reveals the writing on the wall. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, we don't live then. We live in a different, very, very, very different world than Daniel, but do we? Is God still writing on the wall today? Do we understand it? Can we interpret it for the times in which we live? Or is that all done? Oh my goodness, no, not at all. And here's a verse from Philippians that helps us to understand it. From the first chapter of Philippians, we see this. He's talking to believers who are suffering, and they're in a bad place, and the Romans are giving them a really hard time. And what does he say to them? Whatever happens, this is verse 27 of Philippians 1. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. Where's the writing on the wall today? If I read this passage, it's the same place it was then. It's in the suffering church. God is speaking to us through the suffering church in one of many ways. We have a lot of other things going for us too, like this. But one of the ways, the living demonstration, the living writing of his word is this. Without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you, this is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. We listen to and we hear amazing stories of atrocities and hardships that Christians are facing around the world, but we also hear amazing stories of deliverance. We hear amazing stories of God's kingdom moving in the middle of that adversity, growing and flourishing. And what is it? It's a sign. The world's wisdom will perish. The world's wisdom will fade away. And it's a sign that we will be saved. I think of the contrast in today's world. I'm sure some of you read this week about the invention of Tilly Norwood, the new AI-generated actress. She's amazing. When you look at her on TV, you cannot tell she is not real. And she's already getting roles in movies. She has 45,000 followers on Instagram already. People love her. And she can change her accent. When I was listening to her, I think she had an Australian accent, but she can also do a German one or a Brazilian, whatever you want. And listening to the fear of the people in Hollywood, because Tilly is going to take their jobs. She never goes on strike, never has a bad day. So her agent is really easy to work with. She's not temperamental in any way or have a big ego. She just smiles and stays 28, and the girl next door look for the rest of her life. It's a movie producer's dream, because you always know what you get with Tilly. And people love her. She's pleasant, she's caring, she has lots of fans. Taylor Swift, look out. She's coming for you next, because she's going to be doing music soon. You can just tell this is coming around the corner. And so we face fear everywhere. We face fear of the geopolitical world in which we live, the economy. Everywhere you turn on TV, somebody is full of fear. And yet here's the same message. Belshazzar was so full of fear that his knees knocked. It says it gave way, actually. His face turned pale and his knees gave way. Why not? Because he knew that change was coming. And you can either run from fear, from change, or you can embrace it and run toward it when you see how the Lord is working and that he's got this. And Jesus promises over and over and over again that no matter what comes, you're ready and you can be faithful, but his judgment will come. And he is coming because of judgment. And if we don't talk about his judgment, we're selling the gospel big time short. Because if there is no judgment, it just follows we don't need a savior either. But when we see the beauty of what Jesus has done, and when we hear the judge saying, you have been held in the balance and found wanting, our knees don't have to shake in fear. We can say, look at the cross. Look at where the balance comes back into the scale. And that's the beautiful news. And that's what we celebrate together. When we celebrate communion, we come together and we acknowledge the fact that we were caught, just like Belshazzar, not balancing the scales. And no way of doing it until Jesus comes along. Oh, it's a wonderful thing. I was talking to my brother yesterday. He pastors a church west of Edmonton. And he said, so sad. He says, some of these people have been in church for 40 years and they still don't know what I mean when I say Jesus was the Son of God. I said, really? How bad is that? He says, just sad. So he has spent the last 2.5 years going through the book of Matthew. He's a way better preacher than I am. There's no way I could make Matthew interesting for 2.5 years on my best day. But what he does is, these people are so hungry to know the basic truth of who Jesus is. And I think to myself, I would never want to stand before the great judge and have somebody say, well, I don't know, that pastor there in Champion, he never told us Jesus was the Son of God. We just kind of thought it was like a term, like a good guy. He was the Son of God. Never understood the truth. And part of that is what he's done for us. And so it's a beautiful thing to stop and consider that Jesus is the Son of God, that he came to die on a cross for us, that he was resurrected from the tomb, he has defeated death, and